Revelation, subtitle, End of the World or Cause for Hope. And it has been my contention, as is the contention of the writer of this book, John the Revelator, from Patmos, that the answer is cause for hope. He wrote this book to call the church to a greater hope and to endurance through tumultuous times. Today's class 15, is called, let's not beat around the bush, The Whore of Babylon. And we'll get into that in a moment in some of, I won't get ahead of myself, but let's do a brief review first. Last week, we read chapters 15 and 16 together, and these took us to the end of the third cycle of 7 judgments or plagues that were accompanied by, first, the opening of the seals, the blowing of trumpets, and third, the pouring out of ceremonial bowls, each giving a different perspective to the scale of the judgments that are heaped upon the world. And we considered the plagues unleashed on the human race and on earth and noted their parallels in the Hebrew Bible, specifically in the Exodus narrative. We noticed how the violence mirrored the violence of the dragon that the dragon had inflicted on the people by way of the beast, or the Rome. Beast as the stand-in, symbol for Rome. But we also noted how the purpose of each plague was not retributive punishment, a very important thing to note that gets sometimes missed, but rather to motivate those who followed the beast toward repentance. However, what we discover is no matter the scale of the violence, those turned against the lordship of the Lamb or the saints will not be swayed or deterred by violence, however great. And there's a lesson for humanity there too. If even the power of God cannot motivate through violence, one wonders if maybe we're wasting our time as humans trying to motivate through violence. Where we're going tonight, we'll be taking a careful look at the symbolism in chapter 17 so that we may identify who is meant to be portrayed by the whore riding the beast. We'll read Revelation's depiction of her hubris and control, as well as her calamitous demise. Then we'll read chapter 18, which includes eulogies and songs about the woman and the beast's downfall, and we'll consider what the meaning that these word pictures hold for us today. Seems like a lot in 2 chapters, but actually we'll get through it in about the same time as we usually do. But first, let's talk about the problem with this metaphor, Whore of Babylon. And I'm going to quote here extensively from Brian Blunt's commentary on Revelation, as he, in the introduction to his commentary on chapter 17, I think puts it into very clear focus. And I'd like to just establish this from the onset. He writes, quote, John's tone, already contentious, takes a dramatic shift. The righteously indignant seer makes a vicious rhetorical turn that bludgeons women with a sweeping hammer of misogynism as it nails Rome up against the wall of civil and cultic tyranny. Following the lead of some of the most well-known and, in the first century, most oft-quoted scriptures and prophetic figures from Israel's past, he summons the metaphor of the self-serving, self-loathing, greed-guided harlot. And here you see an extended list of references cited as where you can find this metaphor used in other places in the Hebrew Bible specifically. He goes on, even the Christian apostle Paul enlisted the striking image of the illicit and destructive prostitute, 1 Corinthians 6, verses 15 through 16. In fact, the Corinthian text has much in common with John's warning here in chapter 17. John fears that his people will destroy their relationship with Christ by accommodating themselves through either social fear or economic lust to a prostituting relationship with Rome. And in the chapters 2 and 3 of Revelation, you may recall, John begins with warnings to the 7 churches as to what may happen if they should do this. Going on with the quote, Brian Blunt continues, interestingly, demonization is only necessary when one's enemy has one or several truly appealing and admirable traits. It is difficult successfully to condemn an enemy for whom your own people have sympathies and with whom they desire relationship. When logic proves insufficient for the task of turning one's followers away from such an enemy's position and back in the exclusive direction of one's own cultic and ethical directives, one can increase the persuasive odds by revealing the opponent's flaws and hyper distorting them. John does precisely this by pointing to Rome's economic prowess, political dominance, and military supremacy, a most impressive array of imperial traits in the eyes of most Greco-Romans, and declaring that they are not marks of sovereign beauty, but festering, malignant sores. These sores indicate a communicable social disease that will infest any person or people entering into intimate union with her. As beautiful as she seemed on the surface, she is, after all, a filthy, vicious whore. The problem with the whore imagery is that, as it strikes out at Rome, it disparages women. In Revelation, the patriarchal mean streak implicit in ancient Israelite and John's contemporary Christian whore metaphors becomes a misogynistic fault line capable of devouring the self-image of any woman thrown up against it. It is not just the use of the whore image that is problematic, since in this case, John uses that image to attack not women, but Rome. The problem is that his use of the image privileges a male perspective on the divine and matters of human redemption in relation to the divine. The root of evil takes on an unmistakable feminine stamp. The luscious lure of feminine sex, an image of Roman cultic and economic power, seduces the righteous male, representing the people of God, into destruction. Men, the implicit symbolic referent for the people of God, may well ally with the whore, but they are presented as victims who, unlike the woman herself, are capable of redemption if they can find it within their power to resist her. It is the female hooker, not the male Johns, who is the root of the problem. The presentation allows male perspective and image, even when chastising, far less culpability. Femininity, metaphorically speaking, is problematized at its best and demonized at its worst. Evil takes on a decidedly female shape. Sexuality is the problem, and clearly for John here, it has a female orientation. The dysfunction represented in this portrait of the feminine takes a horrific leap forward when John narrates the destruction of Rome/Babylon as the justifiable stripping naked, devouring, and eating of this female whore. To be sure, John is speaking only metaphorically, using symbol, and not intending the torture and killing of a real woman. But commentators are right to point out that even such symbolic disparagement can have and has had disastrous effect. As Reddish concedes, and here is a quote within a quote, not very good writing, I know, but gets the job done for here. As another biblical commentator, Reddish, who Blunt here quotes, concedes, the danger of imagery such as that used in Revelation 17 is that it may be heard by some, certainly erroneously, to condone violence against women, particularly evil women. One can therefore only regret that John chooses the image of a female person as his operative metaphor when projecting God's judgment upon Rome. That is, however, his metaphor of choice. And in my commentary on this section, my being Dr. Blunt, on Dr. Blunt's commentary on this section, he must deal with this metaphor. If I were preaching from this text, he writes, I would struggle to find another image that, while maintaining John's concern for the seductive and ultimately destructive allure of an entity that would idolatrously place its own image on a par with or in place of God, does not disparage the feminine. There ought to be a way to target the evil of empire without exposing women to such rhetorical and potentially real collateral damage. And later, by the way, I do employ a few metaphors that are not nearly as powerful as this one, because the thing is, it is potent. It does make the point, but I feel like I'm going to second what Blunt writes about here, using woman as the metaphor for penultimate evil as a symbol for the Roman Empire is problematic. And over the course of time, as we have thought through these things and actually followed in the example of Jesus, who as we read the Gospels, we notice elevating women at every turn. We would do well to note that there are problems with this metaphor. But for today, we're going to take it and interpret it as intended, as a metaphor for Rome's seductive ways and the way that it pulls others into its tragedy and its downfall. So here we go. We're going to begin reading Revelation chapter 17, starting with verse 1. The whore of Babylon introduced. Quote, Then one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great whore who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have engaged in sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose prostitution the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk." So he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. Of this, Blount writes, John's idolatrous city sits enthroned upon many waters. The reference is both literal and symbolic. As the beast from the sea, Rome literally reaches Asia Minor from the sea and would be thought of directly in relationship to it. Stepping away from the quote for a moment, keep in mind that this is addressed to the churches of Asia Minor, who would be across the sea from the Italian peninsula. So it seems to perch on the sea, surrounded by seas on the peninsula. The prophet Jeremiah described Babylon in the same way that John now envisions Rome, as a city sitting, or in other words, enthroned on many waters. Babylon literally sat on the Euphrates River. Now, in verse 2, it says that the kings of the earth have engaged in sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose, let me get this right, the kings of the earth have engaged in sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose prostitution the inhabitants of the earth have become drunk. It's important to remember before going forward that when sexual immorality and infidelity language is used here, going forward in this text, it is purely metaphorical, likening the appeal of Rome's wiles to the appeal of a seductive yet vile woman. Okay, so whenever you read of that, don't think that John has as his target primarily sexual immorality so much as the metaphor of a seductive yet problematic woman. Now, a flashback to the beast from the sea, who she seems to be writing. In Revelation chapter 13, you see the symbolism that we explained back when, and I'll just go through it again so we don't have to. I didn't want to rewrite it out. This is literally the slide from that lesson 12. Has 10 horns. Here is a hearkening back to the 10 horns on the head of the beast in Daniel 7, and here they represent 10 kings. Each would presumably represent the succession of Rome's kings, each serving the same beast. Beast has 10 horns to be compared with the Lamb's 7. The Lamb has 7 horns, symbolizing perfection and completeness to Christ's power. In competition and in hubris, Rome claims to have more power, represented by its 10 horns. Those horns will also take on more meaning as we go forward, and we'll get to that in a moment. Now, 7 heads representing the 7 hills and the 7 emperors. We'll get to that here in a moment. But specifically, I also wanted to touch on blasphemous names from the previous lesson. The blasphemous names referenced here in Revelation 13 and also in 17 that we just read, the blasphemous names on the beast's 7 heads evoke images associated with Roman coinage. John's hearers and readers would regularly have seen the heads of emperors on imperial coins with titles like God or Son of God or Savior or Lord, and all of these titles ascribed to the emperor of Rome. And since those titles and realities behind them belong only to God and to the Lamb, John regards their attribution to Roman emperors as blasphemy. So it's that same beast. It's a callback, but this time it's being ridden by a woman, and we'll continue to read of her. Verse 4. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her prostitution. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of whores and of earth's abominations. And I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. Of this, Blount writes, and here in this quote is another quote within a quote. Bad scholarship, I know, but hey, I've got limited time. But of this, Blount writes, and quoting a scholar named Bauckham in the middle, key here is the observation that the woman and the beast both seem to represent the same entity, the city of Rome. The fact that the woman rides the beast, however, suggests that they are different entities. Nevertheless, because of their parallel descriptions, I being Dr. Blount, argues that John understands them to be one and the same entity, to which he gives the name Babylon. The metaphors designate different functions of the same figure. If we were to compare Rome to a ship, we might imagine the beast as the below decks engine room that powers the vessel, and the woman as the top deck bridge from which command decisions are made. No matter which metaphor is used, whore or beast, the same vessel is in view. As Buckham puts it, chapter 17 brings the two images together. The harlot is enthroned on the seven heads of the beast. In other words, Roman civilization, as a corrupting influence, rides on the back of Roman military power. Now, the golden cup is a callback to Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 7, which there associates Babylon with a cup that makes the whole world drunk. And in Jeremiah's case, Babylon is the cup. In Revelation, however, Babylon holds the cup in her hand, yet the imagery of national seduction is the same. Sorry, it's a mistype there. In verse 4, the woman is described as rich and wealthy, a rich and wealthy Roman noble. She is clothed in pearls, in other words, is dressed like a wealthy courtesan, also wearing scarlet, which is the color of red, which also represents Rome, as we'll find later, and has also been previously mentioned. John probably intends for his readers to see this woman in Revelation 12, to see this woman in Revelation 12, verses 1 through 6. So I made a mistype here. What Catherine Corey in the New Interpreter's Bible Commentary is saying here is that this woman here, the whore of Babylon, is meant to be held up as a contrast to the bride of the Lamb that that was mentioned in Revelation 12 and will come back in Revelation 19. On her forehead was written a name that suggests the lowest form of prostitute, a tattooed slave. In that day, one might be marked with the mark of one's ownership on the forehead. And just as was the case with the 144,000 who were stamped with the mark of the Lamb, so too is the whore who represents Rome. She is marked with a mark that identifies her as one who is a re-embodiment of Babylon. In Revelation, Rome equals Babylon and Babylon equals Rome, both of which are represented by the whore of Babylon and the two beasts controlled by the dragon or Satan, which were introduced in chapter 12. So here, the point overall, Rome is likened to an arrogant, gaudy, and proud power. She is dressed in finery, but is drunk on a cup full of abomination and the impurities of her prostitution. And we will find out later that her ostentatious life is subsidized by the blood of the saints, as it says in verse 6. Her pomp and stature are only made possible and maintained by way of violence and cruelty, as has been the repeating theme throughout this book. The text goes on, and here we have a response from John the Revelator. He writes, "When I saw her, I was greatly amazed. But the angel said to me, 'Why are you so amazed? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to ascend from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will be amazed when they see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come.'" So first, we have John greatly amazed, as anyone was and would have been, by the economic and political and military superpower that was the Roman Empire in that day. Rome's wealth and displays of power are so overwhelming and convincing that here John is momentarily taken aback by the grandeur of the woman and the beast. And to this, the angel replies, "Why are you so amazed?" And they go on to foretell of Rome's pending destruction, and her fall will amaze the inhabitants from all over the earth, for its reign claimed to be eternal, in opposition to the eternal reign of God and Christ. And when she falls, they will be amazed, because they had thought that Rome was the greatest of great powers. Now, this phrase, "it was and is not and is to come," you may sort of recognize as a phrase ascribed to God in the throne room earlier in Revelation as one who was and is to come. This being a subtle change, who was and is not and is to come. Of this, Brian Blunt writes, "The angel's play on the God/Lamb narration is no doubt a mocking of the beast's pretentious desire to stand itself in the place of true lordship." To be sure, the beast seemed to be all powerful, since Rome had surely built the kind of empire that could elicit awe even from a devoted Christ follower such as John. But already the reign of the beast is not. For with the advent of the seventh seal slash trumpet slash bowl, God's judgment has come. Now that the judgment has arrived, the power that was certainly is not all that it thinks it is. Mockery is certain at the end of the verse when John returns to this threefold formulation, but with slightly different wording. In this rendition, the beast who was and is not is about to appear. And I'll add on to this is a beast who already, in a metaphorical sense, is a nobody when compared to the lordship of Christ, but is about to appear, but not to reign, but to appear for its destruction. And so the beast in this text is being held in juxtaposition to the God and to the Lamb who were, who are, and who are to come in the present tense, and who are in the eternally fixed sense, as contrast with the transitory nature of all empires, even the Roman Empire. The revelation goes on. Verse 9. This calls for a mind that has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. Also, they are 7 kings, of whom 5 have fallen. 1 is living, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. So the 7 heads, noticed already in chapter 13, verse 1, and here again in chapter 17, verse 3, are 7 mountains upon which the woman sits enthroned. John has already alluded to the reign of the woman by noting that she sits enthroned on many waters, which will be defined here as many peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So this is the city of Rome sitting as the seat of political power is the idea. On the many waters, the Italian peninsula, surrounded by the seas, with an expansive empire that surrounds it, and also on the beast. Now, each of those symbols is, like the 7 mountains, a metaphor of Rome. According to legend, Romulus, founder of Rome, built the original city on 7 hills. As surely as any contemporary American reader would recognize Philadelphia as the city of brotherly love, or Chicago as the Windy City, a first-century Greco-Roman would have immediately understood a reference to the city on 7 hills as a reference to Rome. That's another reference to Brian Blunt. I realize I'm using a lot, probably over much in this lesson, but that was very helpful for me, and I bring it up to be helpful for you to think of all of these nicknames or shorthands that we have for cities. And if you were on concert in Philadelphia, or if you were in concert in Pittsburgh and you were said to the crowd, I just came from the city of brotherly love, or welcome city of brotherly love, if it's where you were, everyone would know what you meant. Or we have several nicknames, Naptown, Circle City here in Indianapolis, and folks that are in the know. And the city on 7 hills, it was shorthand for Rome, but also associated with 7 kings. Now, we already discussed this in our previous discussion on chapter 12, but to refresh your memories, the 5 fallen kings represent the previous 5 emperors who had reigned previously, the 5 going back to the time of Jesus when he was born. The 6th represents the current emperor. In all likelihood, consensus seems to be the Emperor Domitian. The 7th, yet to come, represents symbolically the completeness or fullness of human rule. Remember, there's all of these number symbols throughout: 40, the number 12, 3, 7, and 7 representing the completeness or fullness of human rule. You may recall earlier that periods of 7 years were mentioned as times of completeness, and periods of 3.5 years represented periods of incompleteness. Well, this is to say the 7th king has come, the 7th emperor. It is the fullness of human rule. And the symbolic message being God will bring the reign of despotic human governances to an end in due time. And the short reign of the 7th, or the pending emperor, the one who was just around the corner, is a sign of God's imminent intervention. This is John's way of saying that this will not last for very much longer. Hold on, hold fast the hope. Now, as for the eighth king, there are two plausible interpretations that I've found that I just don't know, and I kind of like both, and I don't know which to side with. So I'll just give you both. As for this eighth king, because that's a deviance from the formula of seventh being a number of completeness, and it's almost like we're tipping back over into incomplete territory here. Well, one thought is that if the sixth is the one who rules in John's present time, the sixth king or emperor, the eighth rules in that imminent moment of judgment that has already been inaugurated with the seventh seal, trumpet, or bowl. In this view, the eighth king, who is also represented by the beast, arrives just as God deals justly with humanity and is therefore more or less dead on arrival, never really a king in his own right. Another thought is expressed by Catherine Corey, as a biblical commentator, Catherine Corey, as follows. This part of the angel's interpretation is confusing, she allows, but it may refer to a late first century legend about the Emperor Nero. We've already talked about this legend, just to remind you, who was expected or feared to return to life and continue his violent reign. Regardless of how we interpret the numbers, John's primary message is that the Roman emperors are symbolic representations of the beast who stand in direct contrast with God the Almighty. That last line, whichever way you cut it, the heads of the beast represent the Roman emperors and their reign and the finitude of human rule. But the eighth might be a harkening back to that myth that we talked about, months and months ago, where it was believed that Nero, no one had seen Nero's body when he had killed himself. No one had seen, very few anyway, had seen his body. So there was a rumor that he was going to come back and lead a Parthian army from across the sea and reclaim a lordship, as it were. And perhaps that is what's being alluded to here. But either way, from that last line, it doesn't matter. They all belong to the beast that goes to destruction in the end. Their fate is all the same. Now, I've got a comment on this picture. It's like a T-Rex with multiple heads. I found this one somewhat ridiculous, but I just had to include it. Pretty impressive. Moving on, verse 12. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom. These are different kings than the 7 we just talked about. But they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are united in yielding their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is the Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called and chosen and faithful. So here we have one last final attempt to thwart God and the Lamb. You may recall back in chapter 12 how the dragon, Satan, was cast from heaven with a heavenly host, and Satan is who called these beasts, or this beast in specific, this one from the sea, to represent Rome's military power back in chapter 12. And that was to marshal up a response to God's response to the dragon, or the great evil. It's personified as the dragon or Satan. And so it's kind of a back and forth, right? And now the seven kings, or 7 emperors, represented by the 7 horns, that their rule has come to an end. And so now we have the beast marshaling new resources as a final gasp and effort to best the God and the Lamb. And the beast will marshal these armies from across the world to fight in opposition to the reign of Christ and in defense of the reign of Caesar. Their symbolization as horns, wrong use of the word there, I apologize. Their symbolization as horns suggests that they represent a vital source of the beast's power, because horns symbolize power. Now, these are not to be confused, as I've been saying, with the 7 Caesars or kings, or the kings of the earth, as mentioned in the other places in Revelation, and here are a few references. These 10 are aspiring up-and-coming kings who seek to ride the Rome bandwagon to glory over and against the lordship of Christ. It is as though the very aspiration of human lordship draws one into rebellion against the lordship of God and the Lamb. Perhaps this is John's way of saying that every human rule, because of the inclination of humans to idolize themselves and their capabilities, is on a potential collision course with God's rule. Oh, and their reign will be short, you may have noticed, alluding to the futility of their efforts. That's 1 hour, right? Again, metaphorical time, very short, not even, time and a half, like 3.5 of 7 years. This is a very fleeting moments. They'd have done better if they had thrown off allegiance to the beast, as the saints have done, and claimed Jesus, the Christ, as their Lord. Then the true Prince of Peace would supply them what Rome had long promised but could not deliver. And rounding out the chapter here, verse 15. And he said to me, the waters that you saw where the whore is seated are the peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the whore. They will make her desolate and naked. They will devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purpose by agreeing to give their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. So here the whore, the city, Rome specifically, the seat of political and cultural influence, is unable to satisfy the desires of the nations she would control. She has seduced them and lured them in on a false promise. The powers who have aligned with her against the lordship of God and the Lamb now turn against her. Blount writes, the forces that represent Roman resistance to the lordship of God and the Lamb will turn on themselves. Before the Lamb engages and destroys them at 19 verses 11 through 21, they will engage and begin the process of destroying each other. The 10 horns, which are the 10 kings who have not yet received their rule, will join with the beast in hatred of the whore. It is as though the engine room that powered a ship made war on the bridge that guided it. Now, this devouring of her flesh is an allusion to the fate of Jezebel, the wicked queen mentioned in 1 Kings, verse 21, who was pushed out of a window and whose dogs licked up her blood on the streets. And so it's tying her in with tying the Whore of Babylon in with that story. And it's describing here what happens as empires crumble and as structures that exploit and feed on others will eventually turn on themselves as they lose control, as has been witnessed again and again and again. As empires and power structures fall, the people in them turn on themselves. And that's what you have here. Now, verse 17 is an assurance that despite all appearances, God is in charge. It says God has put it into their hearts to carry out his purposes. It's a callback again to the Exodus story where Pharaoh will harden his heart to the plight of the Israelites, and then God will in turn give Pharaoh his heart's desires by hardening Pharaoh's heart to God's purposes. It's a way of using the choices of those who would work evil in the world to God's ends. It's a way of saying God is still sovereign despite the efforts to thwart God's efforts to cultivate life and love and goodness in the world. And then verse 18, if it weren't clear before, the woman that you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Make no bones about it. The whore is the city of Rome. And the beasts represent different aspects of Rome's rule, military rule. The beast that doesn't come out in this one, the one that comes from the land, represents, the mercantile class. This is Rome here talked about. Now, we're going to do something different for Revelation 18 because much of it is poetry and song. And I wrote here, the Whore of Babylon eulogized. So after what we've just read, and after we've read of the beginning demise, and we'll read more of it next week as we read chapters 19 and 20. But here we have, as we've seen in other places of Revelation, people coming, erupting into song. In this case, angels, in this case, different humans on the earth. And I'm just going to read it. I'm going to read it straight away and just have us hear it as a eulogy for Babylon, for Rome, but really for all of the hubris of humankind. It reads, after this, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined by his splendor. He called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul bird, a haunt of every foul and hateful beast. For all the nations have fallen from the wine of the wrath of her prostitution, and the kings of the earth have engaged in sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury." Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Render to her as she herself has rendered, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double dose for her in the cup she has mixed. As she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, so give her a like measure of torment and grief, since in her heart she says, I rule as a queen. I am no widow, and I will never see grief. Therefore her plagues will come in a single day, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned with fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. And the kings of the earth who engaged in sexual immorality and lived in luxury with her will weep and wail over her when they see the smoke of her burning. They will stand far off in fear of her torment and say, Alas, alas, the great city, Babylon, the mighty city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. And the merchants of the earth weep and mourn for her, since no one buys their cargo anymore, cargo of gold, silver, jewels and pearls, fine linen, purple, silk and scarlet, all kinds of scented wood, all articles of ivory, all articles of costly wood, bronze, iron, and marble, cinnamon, spice, incense, myrrh, frankincense, wine, olive oil, choice flour and wheat, cattle and sheep, horses and chariots, slaves and human lives. The fruit for which your soul longed has gone from you, and all your delicacies and your splendor are lost to you, never to be found again. The merchants of those wares who grew wealthy from her will stand far off in fear of her torment, weeping and mourning aloud. Alas, the great city, clothed in fine linen, in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, with jewels, and with pearls, for in 1 hour all this wealth has been laid waste. And all the shipmasters and seafarers, sailors, and all those whose trade is on the sea, stood far off and cried out as they saw the smoke of her burning, What city is like the great city? And they threw dust on their heads as they wept and mourned, crying out, Alas, alas, the great city, where all who had ships at sea grew rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she has been laid waste. Rejoice over her, O heaven, you saints and apostles and prophets, for God has condemned her condemnation of you. Then a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, With such violence, Babylon, the great city, will be thrown down and will be found no more. And the sound of harpists and entertainers and flutists and trumpeters will be heard in you no more. And an artisan of any trade will be found in you no more. And the sound of the millstone will be heard in you no more. And the light of a lamp will shine in you no more. And the voice of bridegroom and bride will be heard in you no more. For your merchants were the magnates of the earth, and all nations were deceived by your sorcery. And in you was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints, and of all who have been slaughtered on earth. So I'll just take a moment to note that this millstone thrown into the sea reference is a callback to Jeremiah 51, verses 63 through 64, where we read of the scroll, the prophecy wrapped wrapped around a stone and cast into the river there by Babylon, as a symbol of it being sunk, its end. And here it is sunk, made no mistake. And a great show of display and power to reveal God's justice and majesty. And the reasons for its demise are named here for the umpteenth time, and I'll just point them out. in case you missed them, they'll there will be no more, harpists, entertainers, trumpeters, marriages, because the merchants were magnates of the earth. In other words, those who ran the world resided here and did so unjustly. And all of the nations were deceived, brought into the Roman Empire with false promises through conquest, through violence, and other things. And the third reason was all of this resulted in the saints, the prophets, those who advocated for the goodness of God slaughtered on the earth. And now all of that has come crashing down. And also we have a glimpse into the future of where this book is going and where we'll go next week. But first, some final thoughts before we open it up to conversation. Because Rome did fall. And now its descent was not like the millstone thrown into the sea, so magnificent. Although if you take it in slow motion and speed it up, maybe you could see it that way, a fall over the course of decades and centuries, something so great and grand is still a grand fall, but its descent was not so magnificent and grand as the imagery of Revelation portrays, but it did fall. I rule as a queen. I am no widow, and I will never see grief, says Rome in Revelation 18, verse 7. And these words echo the sentiment of the greedy and the powerful in any age who promise peace and tranquility at the cost of one's fealty and obeisance. I'm thinking here of politicians who claim to be uniquely able to stand in as our saviors, of corporate masters who promise salvation through products and services, or of nation states that attempt to position themselves in place of the realm of God. Over time, as greed overextends and as promises remain unkept, those who had once turned to the idol for salvation turn against it. This is symbolically described at the end of chapter 17 with the dismemberment of the woman representing the city of Rome. She rode the beast and was one with the beast until there was no use for her. There is no loyalty in hell. All who had been for her are now against her. I am reminded here of the frailty of political and military alliances throughout the 20th century. The laments at the back half of chapter 18 really grab me, for there is described the response of those who had profited by or had hoped to profit by Rome before its fall. They are appalled at the collapse of a political superpower that had been thought of as impervious and eternal. They had thought of their alliances with Rome, that their alliances with Rome would cause them to profit and to prosper. Now they discover that they bet on a lame horse. If Rome were here are my analogies, again, not as potent or powerful as the one used in Revelation, but void of the problematic whore language. If Rome were a used car, they had bought a lemon. Although, as with the drunken woman that topped the beast in these chapters, this car has been polished up, repainted, buffed, and washed. It is in appearance a top-tier vehicle, but if you scratch the paint or look under the hood, you will find that it is held together by wire and tape. Its power and might are illusory. Something similar may be said of humanity's governances, economic structures, and armies today. From the perspective of Revelation, any person or governance that is not under the lordship of Christ is ultimately frail and will not overcome the realm of God. Here are my references. Perhaps a screenshot if you want to come back to them later. Next class will be in 2 weeks, April the 17th. Next week we have a meeting at the church, so we won't be able to put on the Bible study, but same time and same places, although no one really comes to the church. Everyone seems to join by Zoom. But I will turn it over now to questions or comments. Your thoughts. Make sure you unmute yourselves too if you have something to say.
There are multiple sources that make this person a competing religion.
Mm-hmm.
That the empire is the beast, but it might be Jerusalem, which may be veiled reference to Judaism. It seems like somehow it just being a dual nature of Rome is unsatisfying to a lot of people. that it could be Jerusalem. Martin Luther said it was the Catholic Church, as you might expect him to do.
Well,
he had axes to grind, So I guess my response is she still important to the story from our point of view? It's important for John to put it in there because John put it in there. So if she is a schism of some group currying favor with Rome, from 2,000 years ago, but if she's, I mean, the Jerusalem or the Sadducee temple kind of makes sense. They curried up to Pilate while he was there. Then, and this happened before, so it's not really prophecy; it's only story. The temple fell with the revolt in 70, and so that ties everything up in a really nice little bow that Rome ate, devoured in the end. But anyway, my question remains my question is like, if this is a physical person or a group of people, or Roman elites from 2,000 years ago, it's kind of not relevant. Now, you brought up there at the end about people still do the same kind of thing. Good point. But if she's not, there's not a lot of interpretations that a 21st century open-minded individual aren't going to put an ism at the end of to interpret that.
Few things. One, I want to push back on the interpretation that is putting Judaism in competition with Christianity in the book of Revelation. There are points in the Christian scriptures where, as there became schisms between Judaism and the Roman Empire, and then Jewish communions with Christian communions that were worshiping Jewish Jesus followers and Gentile Jesus followers would worship in the same places I've mentioned before. When those separations became more pronounced in the last part of the first century, you do get what became very clearly the finger pointed at Rome as the person who killed, as the entity that killed Jesus. By the time you get to John written, you have Jesus, who was a Jew, proclaiming, you have disciples proclaiming very unpleasant things on what is presumptively their own faith. And the case that Bible scholars make is that the anti-Semitism that was rife in the culture begins to become reflected in even our scriptures. And in another conversation, I think I can demonstrate that. In Revelation, John, first off, Greek was not his native language. That's clear in the very beginning of this series. We talked about the very strange Greek he employed that makes it very kind of clunky and difficult to decipher in some ways, and even uniquely his in some points, but also draws heavily from references from the Hebrew Bible, which shows an intimate understanding of them, is trying to help people who also have a similar intimate understanding see it that way. Also, Jerusalem is referenced in other places in Revelation, and it's referenced in a much clearer way. In fact, the heavenly throne room is cast in the model of Jerusalem, or the temple in Jerusalem, and it's meant to reflect the idea that even the holy city was just to be like a mirrored reflection of what is heavenly. So I'm personally convinced that the dragon is standing for Satan. The beasts are different aspects of Roman imperialism, and the woman specifically what's steering the beast, which is the seat of political power and represents Roman culture and all of its hubris and all of its and also Jerusalem never really in a concerted way spilled the blood of the saints. It was always the Roman government. But I did not encounter that interpretation though, Jay. But
am I wrong that part of this, the fall, where it talks about everybody else is sad to see that she's gone, and that's has to do with commerce, and that they provided luxurious lives for the people that were around them, and that I don't know that Jerusalem did that.
No, all of those things listed, like the ivory comes from Africa, cinnamon, I forget where, but all of those lists of commerce goods reflect the empire-wide network of resources that were, as Rome as the center hub, as the organizing principle, sent out conquest and then maintain trade lines and required taxes, as we read about in our own gospels, but then also resources. So I also, to your point too about its relevance today, and also to what Martin, I don't agree with Martin Luther that the Catholic Church is the Antichrist, or that the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. But if you take them as metaphors, you can apply them to any governance that behaves that way, behaves in a beastly way. And that's why I think it's still relevant today, because you can take, I don't know how, there are industries today that really need to be rethought through. And if that were done, there would be people who profit off those industries that would be very sad at the reorganization. There are nation states like ours, or China's, or Russia's, or any place that's seen as a hub of commercial trade, that if it were to collapse would disrupt the whole network of allies. And we've seen this happen. And whenever alliances shift and one ruling entity falls. As I said, the 20th century is chock full of these sort of alliances shifting, and our enemies at the back half of the 20th century are not the same. Talking about the United States as the front half. Not to mention the Middle East. My goodness. And as these large empires or large political entities that set themselves up as idols, as to be served for their own sake, over against the interests of God and humanity, as that continues, it will just continue to. Revelation shows it just continuing to unravel. And we just see that. It just, once you it echoes again and again through history.
I think it could be something as simple as the Roman Senate.
Mm-hmm. It could be. Yeah.
Or the idea of a republic.
Just the elites that are calling the shots, and
certainly that is the group of elites that were consumed by the military power of Rome, that where Caesar and Augustus were military leaders who controlled the beast and then got rid of the Senate. So
the Herodian dynasty that ran Israel, that's a case in point of like these merchants and the beast that rose from the land that serves the dragon from across the sea, like in places like Israel and other or Great Britain and other places where the empire spread out. It makes alliances in all of those places that serve it. And like in Israel, it was the Herodians. They were Jewish family, but ruled Israel in cooperation with the Roman Empire, and had very Roman-like tendencies, as we read in the birth narratives. Oh, and then just continue, beheading John the Baptist. Those are Jewish rulers of the Herodian dynasty. Well, you all seem very talkative this evening. Actually, it's 8:00, and I did a lot of talking at you. And thank you for your time, and thank you for your attention. And next week or 2 weeks from now, we'll be going over 19 and 20. And there's only 19 and 20. There's only 2 more lessons on the text itself, and 2 more lessons will be through the text. And then we just have 1 lesson on Revelation through the centuries. So we'll just be going on like how it's been understood by like the likes of Martin Luther and people in between, before and after. And then we'll talk about how it functions today in our culture today, because it's all over the place. It's in pop culture. Our culture is shot through with references to Revelation, even used by people who don't even know where they come from. So we'll talk about that, and that will be the end. 4 more lessons. I thought this would be done in early March. Well, here we are. Well, grace and peace to you, and bye.
Thanks, Steve.